morning, everyone. Welcome.
Good morning.
Welcome. I apologize if I stand up, then people on Zoom won't be able to see me. So I'll just do my best to look around here. My name is Mark Mann. I'm the Director of Programs and Institutes here at the Catholic Information Center. The ministry of the center creates spaces for dialogue, encounter, and community at the intersection of faith and life. And the witness of our hope is that people of all walks of life will experience the good news of God's reign with joy. We're a ministry of the Paulist Fathers in collaboration with the Diocese of Grand Rapids. And very happy to have all of you here today, those of you in person and those joining us online from wherever you are in this country of ours. As we gather 1 week after the U.S. general election, we have the opportunity to reflect on what are free and fair choices made by voters on November 5th. And we also know that this election was unprecedented in many ways, and it's evoked many feelings. The election of the new president-elect brings a sense of relief for some people. For others, our hopes are dashed. For many more, we remain concerned about the state of our country, regardless of who we voted for, Republican, Democrat, or one of the other parties. Our hope today is to be able to make room for one another, to be able to explore Catholic social teaching, to be able to renew our call to continue to be engaged in politics. That as Catholics, we know that our job isn't over after we've cast our vote. And at the same time, we also want to make room knowing that politics is always local, which means it's going to happen at our family dinner tables or the next holiday gathering or the next time you're at parish. And it may not be about the particular candidate or president-elect. It may be a conversation about the economy or about Ukraine or about Gaza. And inevitably politics comes in, right? So how do we make room for each other? And how do we remain hopeful in this age where hope at sometimes can be an act of resistance? Before we meet our panelists, I want to have us continue with a moment of prayer. In his recent encyclical on the love of Jesus in the Sacred Heart, Pope Francis writes this: "We see then in the heart of each person there is a mysterious connection between self-knowledge and openness to others, between the encounter with one's personal uniqueness and the willingness to give oneself to others. We become ourselves only to the extent that we acquire the ability to acknowledge others, while only those who can acknowledge and accept themselves are then able to encounter others." In this encyclical, in his teaching, Pope Francis reminds us that divine love, that is the Sacred Heart of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Christ never abandons us. Christ is at the center of our own hearts. But we must practice the disciplines of prayer, listening, and expressing ourselves with integrity and honesty to hear what Christ in our hearts is calling us to. So I invite you to take a moment just to reflect on the following questions before we continue with our prayer. What is your experience of God in the present moment? What is your prayer for yourself right now? And what is your prayer for your neighbor right now? Let us pray. Father, your truth is made known in your word. Guide us to seek the truth of the human person. Teach us the way to love because you are love. Jesus, you embody love and truth. Help us to recognize your face in the poor. Enable us to live out our vocation to bring love and justice to your people. Holy Spirit, you inspire us to transform our world. Empower us to seek the common good for all people. Give us the spirit of solidarity and make us one human family. We ask this through Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Thank you. Well, as I said, our hope today is to explore how we can communicate with family members, with neighbors, with public servants, and with legislators, and to learn how to remain engaged in the democratic processes in our country with faith, hope, and love. But the fact of the matter is, this is a confusing time. And as I was trying to prepare my introductory remarks, I myself kept falling into confusion about just how best to frame up our conversation. It was, as I said, it was an unprecedented election in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of emotions. And so acknowledging the need for sensitivity with one another, I also want to take a few moments just to outline some principles for our dialogue today. And really not only for our panelists here, but for all of us, and consider it as a practice ground for the kind of conversations that we'll have in the days to come, in the weeks and years to come. So first, as Catholics, we believe that human beings are created in the image of God, and because of this fact alone, each and every person has an inherent dignity, worth, and value. So in our interactions with one another, we affirm the inherent worth and value of another, even when that person says something we disagree with, or maybe even says something that offends us. The prayer attributed to St. Francis includes the intercession, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood, but to understand. Sometimes we listen to others, and all the while we are preparing our responses in our head, or we find ourselves distracted by the emotions that are evoked by what the person is saying, and internally having a conversation or making a judgment. St. Francis's prayer reminds us to listen, not to challenge or defend, to listen without being distracted, to listen for the intended meaning, knowing that our words can sometimes fall short with what we really want to say. We all process information in different ways. Extroverts need to verbally think out loud, and introverts like to think quietly until they're ready to share. The rule of thumb is if you want to know what an extrovert is thinking, just listen. And if you want to know what an introvert is thinking, just ask. Everyone here has something to teach the rest of the community, and everyone here has something to learn from others. As a community of practice, we can make room because we value the collective wisdom of the group that's gathered here. Most of the time, leaders lead when there are no clear answers, and that's certainly true today at every level. So we lean into the conversations we have, acknowledging that clarity will come in time, that we can really embrace. We're invited to embrace ambiguity and lean into the questions and the confusion, and that clarity will come in time, although perhaps not always in the way that we have been taught to find answers. And then finally, we ask that we hold what we hear here in confidence, and to share that what is spoken, we can share generally what we've learned, but if someone's sharing a story or some personal feelings, that's theirs to share. It's not ours to share for them later on. And so just to hold what is said here, that it stays here. And on that note, I want to acknowledge that this conversation is being recorded, and it's going to be edited in a way that you're going to hear from the panelists. And maybe some of the answers to questions, but not from the people who are questioning. All right. We want to create this space that everyone's voice can be heard. Great. Thanks. Our call as Christians is to live out our faith before and after the election, in the public square and around our family dinner table and with our neighbors. Even as the election is passed, a choice remains. How will we make room for one another? At our next holiday gathering, at the next Sunday gathering at church, our next trip to the grocery store, can we still extend kindness and courtesy to someone who may feel differently about the outcomes to the election? Am I still willing to work with those who are willing to work with me to promote the common good? Jesus brought fresh news to the world. It was news of a totally different social order. News that heralds judgment and a complete reversal for life in this present age. The future age that his news concerns is the reign of God. In Jesus, the Father revealed his love to us, a love that urges a divided humankind to sit together at one table, God's table, where there is room for all. St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis all remind us through their teaching that while our social, cultural, political, and economic systems are imperfect, they can be improved through the actions of Christians who are living out the gospel. As Catholics, we engage in politics because we believe that politics is a noble mission for promoting the common good. Let me repeat that. Politics is a noble mission for promoting the common good. Politics gets a lot of bad rap, and not just in the past 4 years or 8 or 12, but for a while now, right? And politicians are suspect or sometimes held in suspicion. Of course, not the ones I voted for, right? But politicians are held in suspicion. Politics can get a bad rap, but consider as Catholics, what we hold true is that politics is a noble mission for promoting the common good. And we're joined today by our 3 panelists who will help explore that, explore some of the questions of our hearts, but also explore our call to continue to be engaged with hope in our democratic processes. So we're joined today by Paul Stankewitz, and Paul, just give me a chance to spotlight you. There we go. And we got all our panelists up on the screen. Paul Stankewitz is a legislative advocate for the Michigan Catholic Conference. He has extensive experience in public policy, having served as the city manager in Onaway, Michigan, until 2001. And afterwards, he became the director of the Michigan Catholic Rural Life Coalition. And then in his role at the MCC, Paul advocates for education and regulatory issues, focusing on policies that support the most vulnerable populations in Michigan. We're also joined to my left here with Allison McCulley, who's the lead organizer for Together West Michigan, which is a broad-based organization affiliated with the Industrial Areas Foundation. Together West Michigan works to build relationships across community lines, develop leaders, and galvanize citizen-led action on various issues affecting families. Allison has been instrumental in organizing community engagement efforts, including relational meetings, training sessions, public actions to address local concerns such as mental health care, public safety, and education. And Allison is certainly no stranger here at the Catholic Information Center. Welcome, Allison. And then to Allison's left, we're also joined by Paulist Father Mike Cruickshank, who's an associate pastor at the Cathedral of Saint Andrew in Grand Rapids. He was ordained a priest in May of 2021 and has been serving at the cathedral since July of that same year. Father Mike has been involved with young adult ministry in the Catholic Cathedral Social Action Team. He has a background in computer science and finance, and his journey to the priesthood was influenced by his involvement with the Paulist Fathers and their welcoming community. Welcome, Father Mike.
Thank you.
So as we get started, I'm going to allow our panelists to make a few introductory remarks, and we'll start with Paul, because we know, Paul, as you had told us back in September when you were with us, depending on the election goes, this is either a lame duck session, meaning it's really going to just, nothing's never necessarily going to happen, or a lot is going to happen, and people are going to try to get bills passed, and a lot of meetings are going to be happening after the election, and that is certainly true to the case. You're coming from the Capitol to join us today, and I understand you're going to be back at the Capitol as soon as you get off this meeting. So thank you for being here. I wonder if you can share with us some of the insights that you have about the current legislative priorities for the Michigan Catholic Conference, and what are some challenges you see in the upcoming advocacy work?
Well, thanks again for having me, Mark, especially to you and Allison and Father Mike. I'm sorry I can't be there in person with you, but certainly in spirit and via the miracle of Zoom. So and I want to thank everybody that attended the Faithful Citizenship presentation, either online or in person, that I was honored to give back in September. That was the first of 9 that I did, plus a webinar. So I'm glad that those are over with, but it was very enjoyable to be with all of you. That kind of helped me set the tone for the rest of the talks that we had. So the word today is optimism, for me anyway, that win or lose, whichever candidates we supported, as long as we voted according to our well-formed conscience that we spoke about, I think we can feel good and proud of our country and our state for being democratic and having the freedom to vote and to exercise our faith, the all-important right to exercise our faith. So right now, as Mark said, it's the lame duck session of the state legislature. Congress is doing the same thing in Washington, D.C. So lame duck is, for lack of a better term, I say it with a degree of humor, but with common sense, that lame duck is the time that the legislature addresses issues that they either didn't have time to deal with before the election or didn't want to deal with, so that it wouldn't be misconstrued by the other party, as the case may be, before the voters. So a lot of difficult, controversial issues get taken up in lame duck, and it's anybody's guess what gets done and what does not get done. They'll be on a break for 2 weeks after this Thursday, and then for 3 weeks in December. We'll see what happens. But so our priorities right now, among many, but three that I feel comfortable discussing today, is restoring driver's licenses to people who may or may not be able to prove their legal status in the United States, but can prove their residency in Michigan. That was the law in Michigan for decades prior to 2008. In 2008, that right was removed. You now have to prove that you are legally here, not necessarily a citizen, but that you have a green card or some other type of federal visa status. We're trying to get that back to where it was, that as long as you're a Michigan resident and you're a member of the community and you simply want to have a basic driver's license that does not allow you to vote, but allows you to drive on our roads safely, to get to work, to take your kids to school, get to medical appointments, to be a member of your community. That is one of our priorities that we've been working on, as I referenced, since 2008. I was just at a meeting. There's a group called Strangers No Longer, which is a Catholic parish-based organization, grassroots, which is great for us to work with. They have about 180 people at the state capitol today, to remind legislators that they've met with numerous times that this is an important issue back home, and to please support passages of this by the end of December. So that's one of our priorities. Another one is regarding juvenile justice. There was a number of juvenile justice reform bills that we supported, along with many other groups, in the last year during this current 2-year legislative session. The one bill that did not pass yet, it passed the House but not the Senate, would create a system for indigent defense attorneys to serve juveniles. We were one of many groups about 10 years ago that got a package of bills through that created an indigent defense system in Michigan. We're all familiar with the elected prosecutors in each of our counties, but there needed to be a system to have well-qualified defense attorneys so that we do truly have a system of justice. So that's another issue that we're facing right now, is just getting that one bill through that would allow indigent defense attorneys to be prepared and supplied to juvenile defendants. So that's yet another issue. And the third one I'm drawing a blank on right now because my focus is on the driver's license rally. But there's a number of things: affordability of drinking water in Michigan, obtaining additional school safety funding. That's the one I wanted to mention for non-public schools. I think when I spoke to you back in September, we were trying to get additional funding, school safety improvements for non-public schools and public schools. The legislature provided more funding for public schools, but not for non-public schools. So that's something we're also trying to address here in December. And so those are our priorities for the next six or so weeks. We are also in the process of putting together our legislative advocacy priorities for the next 2 years. That will be published, and I don't have a copy here because it's in flux. Our Focus publication called Focus that comes out 4 times a year. Thought I had one prepared here. I don't. That will be out probably early in January. Members of our advocacy network, which I again encourage people to join, will receive that. It'll also be mailed to every parish in the state, and however many copies a parish wants to distribute to its parishioners, those are free of charge. So Mark, I'll make sure that you get a copy of that so you can forward that to this group, and then we'll be off and running for a whole new brand 2 years in the state legislature.
Thanks, Paul. We'll turn now to Allison, coordinator at Together West Michigan. And Allison, can you tell us more about how Together West Michigan facilitates community engagement and advocacy? Thank you, Father Mike.
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you all. So we do what we call this really sexy term, broad-based community organizing, which is a little weird. But what we mean by that is bringing people together across a broad range of institutions and demographics across the community into relationship with each other to build what we call relational power. So not power over anybody else, but power with each other to be able to move the things that we do share that we want to act on. And that's rooted in institutions like faith communities and nonprofits and neighborhood groups that want to be able to do more together than they could on their own around the issues that their families and members are facing. And so our work is to develop the members of those institutions as leaders in the habits and practices of organizing and bring folks together in conversation to say, what keeps you up at night? What pressures are you and your family facing? And do you want to do something about that? And then help folks figure out what are the things that keep coming up across all of these different conversations that we could work on together that we share, and then actually do that. So there is currently 1.5 staff of Together West Michigan. So it is very much led and run by its members and very much about the development of regular folks. We're also part of the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is our national network, which is a weird name for a large national network of groups like us that's not a foundation, but was founded in industrial areas and is working on these kinds of issues across the country and is kind of our community in practice and has really deep roots in the Catholic tradition. So that's what we do.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Father Mike, here, I'll turn the camera to you. So this past weekend was the first weekend after the election. People gathered at Mass. You had the opportunity to preach, and I'm sure as you looked out over the community that was gathered, just you knew there were people who voted one way and people who voted another way, and yet all coming together still to celebrate Mass together, to affirm their faith in Christ, and yet how does and yet there's still the feelings that are there and some of the division that even happens in the church. So how do you, what's your insights, if you can, on how the church supports its members to become more active and informed and to work together?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think I know most of you, if not all of you. And as Mark said, I've been at the Cathedral for about 3 years and change, working with various ministries and communities with the young adults and social action, and now with Hispanic ministry. And I think what I've noticed about the Cathedral, our parish for many of you, is that there is it's very diverse in terms of not only language and race and culture, but ideologies, political views, and so the mission, I feel like my mission, many times, is to find ways in which we can unite one another, despite the different views that we have, and maybe even because of the different views that they have, because maybe they find ways of complementing each other. I know that Pope Francis, before the election, had commented about the two candidates and how, in his view, they were both anti-life or against life because of one stance on abortion, other stance on immigration, and he told us all, encouraged us all to inform our conscience, to pray about it, and to choose, as he said, the lesser of two evils, or maybe we could say the better of the two, if we want to make it a little bit more optimistic. And I think, yeah, at our community, I don't know what the breakdown would be, but certainly there are some that voted for one candidate, some that voted for another candidate. And it was coming together this Sunday, was, I hope, a kind of healing moment in a way. I tried to emphasize that there were, the person sitting next in the pew may have voted in a different direction, and you both might have strong feelings, one of great joy, one of great despair, and yet you're sitting here together next to each other, and that means something. And it means that we believe in something that's greater than politics. Politics is aimed towards the common good, but as Catholics, we believe that our work towards the common good comes from our faith and how our faith informs our social decisions. And so, like Mark said, I think a lot of things need to be held up together if we can carry them all. And that is respecting and appreciating where people are at and how they feel about the election, but also trying to emphasize and encourage all of us to recognize that, I think we'll pray later about the importance of taking the long view and of recognizing that we have a greater power that we believe in, that is all loving and recognizes and shows us through one another the dignity we each have. So I think that's holding all of those things together right now is difficult, but I think that's what we're called to do.
Thanks, Father Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And your comments are a great lead in to the next question. And on the topic of maintaining relationships, how can we maintain and strengthen relationships, including with those who disagree with us politically, whether it's during family gatherings or celebrating Mass together, or afterwards going out for, getting the coffee and donuts? How do we maintain and strengthen relationships? And we'll open the floor to our panelists. So whoever would like to address the question first.
I will take a shot.
Thanks, Allison.
I'll go next.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thanks. So Father Mike, you used the word recognize and recognition a couple of times. And I think that is, from where I stand, that's at the heart of it, whether it's in the grocery store, your dinner table, in your organization or your church. Recognizing the person in front of you as a child of God who has as much dignity and worth in God's eyes as you, which can be very difficult when we disagree. And I think at our heart, all of us, one of the things we most long for is to be seen and to be recognized and to be treated as though we do matter and to be heard, right? So there's a piece by an IAF organizer that I really like about congregational organizing, and he quotes Martin Buber, theologian from Germany who lived through very difficult times as well. And he said, the first service that one owes to others in the fellowship consists in listening to them. Those who cannot listen long and patiently will always be talking past others, and finally will no longer even notice it. The death of the spiritual life starts here. Brotherly pastoral care is distinguished from preaching by the obligation of listening. And so that is one of the very first, that's at the basis of everything Together West Michigan does and teaches, is listening as the center of relational work through relational meetings, one-on-ones, house meetings, neighborhood walks, but to listen to the person in front of you, because whether or not we agree with them, there is a reason in there for why we all do what we do underneath all of the whatever else is there. And I think the first desire we all have is to be seen. And the temptation, I'm going to lift up one other thing here from this author. the temptation is to kind of assume a position of knowing better. And this author talks about the tendency to be an ideologue, an advocate, or a program director, and that the ideologues on either end know all the answers and want the rest of the world to fall in line and to swallow the whole correct analysis or platform or doctrine and just parrot back the party line. The advocate knows all the answers too and wants to speak for others rather than listen and wait for them to develop their ability and skill to voice their own concerns. And the program director wants to deliver the service or food or clothing or housing voucher without getting to know the person who is seeking help, asking what other aspects of that person's life are working or have worked without challenging that person to do as much for himself or herself as humanly possible. And so that, I think, listen is the starting point. And I'll stop talking. Paul, do you want to get in there?
That was very good. So I'll hit a couple of things, both in terms of, my work or the work of the Catholic Conference on your behalf, representing our bishops at the legislature, and then amongst family members and parishioners. So, working with the legislature, the Catholic Conference, just based on Catholic social teaching, we cover a lot of issues in the church. For, again, my vernacular use of the term, we have an opinion on everything, or many things. The church does anyway. So regardless of who's in power, whether it's in Congress or at the state level or even at city council, there's always common ground, and there's always issues that we can agree on, and that's the place to start first. Of where can we agree, and we build upon that. And then I think there are a lot of legislators that might not agree with the teachings of the Catholic faith on certain issues, life issues comes to mind, but they respect the mission of the church to we just had Matthew 25 in the memorial mass for St. Martin of Tours yesterday, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the prisoner, Matthew 25, that there's a respect for the church in doing that. So that's the common ground that we try and find when we meet with legislators, and we'll work with people on some issues and not on others. And we respect that because we have to. And regardless of who's in power, there'll be things that, with the Republicans in control now, at least half of the legislature, we can stop some things that we don't agree with, but there'll be other issues now that we won't be in favor of that the Republicans will push. And it's the same thing at the national level. So again, it's finding common ground. At the family level, and I always joke that, I'm one of those people that enjoys discussing religion and politics. So Thanksgiving is fun to some degree, but I think just having that basic respect and knowing the dignity of each member, as Allison referred to, that at the family gatherings coming up for Thanksgiving and Christmas, the safest thing is just not to discuss politics. But politics is a noble venture for all of us, whether we serve in office or just we're members of society, and that's politics is out there. So I think we shouldn't shy away from it, and just respect, the people voted the way they did for reasons that we may not have agreed with, and just having that conversation that, let's move on now. And we, again, prayer and optimism, I try and focus on those personally and professionally, that we trust in the Lord and we hope in the Lord. That doesn't mean we just wish things get better or wish things are good. We truly trust that God has a plan, and that we're part of that plan and that action here on earth. And to just accept things that, okay, let's pray, really pray for things to turn out better than we expected or as we expected, but prayer should still be part of this, part of our actions. And at the parish level, and Father, that was a great way to explain that we may have our differences, but we all end up back at the altar. We all end up back before the Lord. And I think that's the place that we start with, that we still have our common faith as Catholics, as members of a parish family. We still have our family bonds within our family, and we should never lose sight of those. So don't be afraid to discuss politics, but we need to do it with charity and not hostility. And sometimes that's hard with certain family members, but someone's got to set the tone and remind us all that we're still family, we're still members of a parish, we're still Americans.
Thanks, Paul. Father Mike, you.
Just very, very briefly, and so I appreciate Paul's comments about, for instance, Thanksgiving, which a lot of us will experience soon, being with family, and I think that he's right about we don't need to shy away from politics, but also respectfully. And I would just say, just know yourself, like whether or not you want to get into a discussion or not. Sometimes it's a better thing to avoid it. Just depends on the circumstance. You know, if somebody's spiking the football upon somebody else, that's not good. And so better to shift the subject to something else. But if it is a worthwhile conversation about common good, then yeah, I think that's a good thing to engage in. But yeah, I would just say, just know yourself, what you can handle, what will get you too angry or too upset, and go from there.
Yeah, sure.
I I guess one theologian I really like also, sort of lifted up the same sentiment as Martin Luther King Jr. about darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. So mimicking the dynamics that we don't like, it doesn't help us to point and with equal savagery yell, "See what they're doing? It's so wrong." While someone else is pointing at us and saying, "See what you're doing? It's so wrong." It's the same dynamic, right? It's just you're putting different words in the dynamic. And the way to shift it is to not point your finger and scream, but to have a conversation, right? And I will say, I thought I saw a beautiful seed of this in a conversation this week with someone who works with Together West Michigan. And they said, "Well, frankly, I think everybody who voted for this other person is stupid, but I guess there's something there because a lot of people have, voted this way or the other. So I guess I should shut up and listen." And I said, I feel like that's the perfect crystallization for a lot of people across the spectrum. Like my immediate inclination is I feel like all those people are ridiculous. However, there's clearly something there that I need to pause and listen to, whatever side of the spectrum or wherever you are on. And that took some discipline for that person to pause and see that in themselves. And I thought that was a beautiful example.
Yep. We all seem to personalize our votes. And if the candidate we voted for won, somehow that vindicates me as being right, and the people who voted for somebody else is wrong. And we don't know why. I would need half an hour to explain my vote to any of you, and I'm not going to do that. It's that some things are just better to let's just smile and move forward. But seriously, we don't know why people voted the way they did. And again, I trust and hope and pray that people really considered the importance of their vote and why they were voting the way they did. And we just don't know, because Trump won, that means I was right. Let's say a family member says, no, there might be some things that he supported that they agreed with, and vice versa. And I've seen some early exit poll numbers that show, I think 56% of Catholics in Michigan voted for President Trump to be reelected. I don't know the rationale for voting for him. I would hope that it was based on a well thought out, prayerful rationales. We just have to be careful that we don't project onto everybody else in our family or in our parish or in the workplace that the reasons they voted for that person are terrible, whether it was for Harris or for Trump. Same thing for Congress, et cetera, et cetera. People heard something, obviously the voters, very good, Allison, the way you said that. Obviously, there was something there that people gravitated to in every race that they voted on in the ballot. We need to respect that, and we move forward.
Thanks, Paul. I can see two ways to go forward here in the conversation, but I think I'd like to return to the holiday table. And because I heard some good tips so far on how to just be with one another, especially if there are family members that will be gathering with us who did vote differently. One is what I kind of hear Paul, you saying is, let's give each other the benefit of belief. That whoever we voted for, can we give the other person the benefit of belief that they had a well-informed conscience, that they also had to weigh out all the considerations we did, and they made the choice they made freely, fairly. And Father Mike, you were also talking about maybe we also just need to manage our expectations of what the day is going to look like. I know I think it's a good reminder too as well, and then I'll open the floor for some other tips, but to remind ourselves too in leading up to Thanksgiving and also Thanksgiving itself or other holidays, Christmas gathering, whether it's with a company party or with a family holiday, right? Is the difference between selfish care and self-care, right? Selfish care is no one feels like I do. And so I'm gonna drink heavily, which is always an option or whatever, right? But it doesn't really serve us well, really, in the end. That doesn't serve us, right? And then there's self-care, which says I'm going to cut myself some slack. I'm going to acknowledge the feelings I have. I don't need other people to validate the feelings I have, although that always feels good when someone feels the way I do and can understand me, right? Extend some understanding. But extending understanding doesn't mean they have to disagree with or agree with me either, but can they at least understand how I'm feeling, right? So there's giving ourselves, being gentle with ourselves, going for a walk, taking a break if you have to, and making the promise I'll be back. But if you have to take a walk, you take a walk. I think there's also the idea of soul care, and which I recently heard from work of Michelle Lloyd Page, who shares about putting ourselves in the disposition of allowing God to care for us. The fact of the matter is God's not anxious about the future.
True.
God's not nervous or anxious, and God makes room for our feelings. And can we put ourselves in the disposition of allowing God to care for us? So I found those helpful tips for myself leading up to in this past week, as well as moving forward with the concerns that I have on, can I not only take care of myself without drinking heavily, and can I also put myself in the position in prayer to just say, God, I don't know what the future has right now, and I don't have to, and you've got this, and can you just care for me? Other tips for getting ready for the holidays from, again, I've already heard several, but I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to offer.
Watch the sarcasm in addition to the drinking. It's sarcasm has its place, and I enjoy it as much as the next person. We have to be careful when, if we're trying to have peace with our family. And again, just think back, and Mark, that was awesome. God isn't anxious. God has a plan. We already know God wins in the end. It's just we got to run out the clock, as the Archbishop of Detroit is fond of saying. It's the same thing. We're going to fall back into family traditions and football and reasonable drinking, and life goes on. But the sarcasm thing, I'll go back to that. It's really easy to say, well, that was some election, wasn't it? And oh, yes, it was. I sure am praying that he does okay. Watch the tone of voice, because you might be sincere that, hey, I am sincere. I'm praying for our country. I will pray for President Trump and all of our leaders that they're open to God's will and that they do the right thing. And if they didn't support the right thing in my mind during election time, I sure hope they're open to God's wisdom and they're open-minded. And say that prayerfully, but don't because of the tone of voice can just detour a well-intentioned comment into a fight because, oh, so you're really praying for them? That doesn't sound sincere to me. Just watch the tone of voice. And we all know our family members. We know how they are all the time, and they're still family. So if somebody says something about, I'm so glad she got defeated, or I'm so glad she won that Senate race, in your mind, just like smile and like, oh, Uncle Charlie, what a character, and move on. And I say that with humor, but with sincerity too, because our families are still going to be our family, and we come together when we need to come together, and that's not going to change, and it shouldn't change because of politics.
Right. Thanks, Paul. Let's keep the holiday dinner table in mind, but let me shift to just talk about when we get into situations where we need to de-escalate a potential conflict. Thinking of your experience, your work, are there tips from your work experience that would help us not only in our, talking with other people that we may be trying to work together on, on a particular issue or advocate for something, but also around the family dinner table. Do you have any tips on de-escalating potential conflicts? And let me set this up. One of my favorite formulas is an unaddressed concern leads to a complaint, and an unaddressed complaint can lead to a conflict. So
Yep.
offer that as we open the floor for what are some of your experience and tips that you have for de-escalating potential conflicts? Who wants to take a
These are
start?
getting harder. Mark, these are getting harder all the time. When do we get to the holiday dessert part of the talk?
Oh, that's good.
I guess, be open to listening. And if there's something that's said that you haven't thought of before or is contrary to your way of thinking, I think acknowledging a comment like, well, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that before. And don't just blatantly well, that's stupid or that's a dumb idea. Just like, well, and I again, with sincerity and charity that, well, Uncle Mark, I hadn't really thought of it that way before. It's an interesting point you raised. I'll have to give that some thought. That's a quick way to address their comment. And always get back with people. If you, well, give that some thought, Paul, and maybe after the game you can have an answer for me, or at some time over the holidays, and then get back with somebody and say, I took to heart what you said, and I gave that some thought, and I still don't agree with you, but I understand where you're coming from now, and thanks for sharing that with me. That goes a long way to smoothing out a discussion with a legislator or with an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, grandpa, grandkids, whatever.
Great.
I guess when you talk about a concern, a complaint, and then a conflict, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because things escalate when people don't feel like when we don't feel like we're being heard. And so we have to get louder to be heard. So one of the things that might be helpful that we teach people in house meetings and relational meetings is to say, can you tell me a story about that? Like, it's very easy to philosophize and talk about what you saw on X or what so-and-so said. But really, like, usually there's something in whatever you saw that resonates with something that has happened to you or a fear that you have from your own experience. And that's at the root of it. And that's where I think the conversation happens is, well, sounds like you're really concerned about X. Can you tell me a story about that? It sounds like you're really concerned about gun violence, right? This came up in a house meeting we did at a parish a couple weeks ago. Someone just sort of started philosophizing about guns. And we said, well, can you tell me a story about that from your own life? And they said, well, my child goes to Gerald R. Ford Academy, and I'm really concerned because they keep finding guns in kids' backpacks, and I'm worried about the safety of my child in that school. Now, that's a different conversation than gun rights at large, right? And that's a place from which you can start, and then you can understand where this person is coming from, right? And I also think one of the biggest things that's causes those issues is our assumptions about each other. And my assumption that if I share something with you, you're going to reject me, or if I even try to talk to you, or that you couldn't possibly understand. And I got in big trouble with one of our leaders about this last year, I think. And she's a African-American woman, mother of like 4 kids. We met for a relational meeting in a McDonald's, and we were talking, and she looked at me and she goes, Allison, you play it way too close to the vest. I don't know anything about you. Like, tell me something real. And I thought I was being polite, but she like wanted to know something real about me. And we were talking about mental health, and I was like, well, I lost my older sister to suicide a couple years ago. It was the most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. This is how it impacted my family. It changed the way I see the world and life. You know, when something like that happens, your heart breaks and it's never whole again. And she said, my son attempted suicide 3 times this year. I know exactly what that's like. And we, told me some about that. And we sat and looked at each other. And she goes, I never would have guessed that about you. Just looking at you. Same, right? Like you don't guess that about people walking down the street. But if we had just assumed we had nothing in common, we wouldn't have. And we would never have known that. and there would have been no place to move forward to work together. But because we were willing to have a conversation about, here's been a real experience I've had, which includes some calculated vulnerability and the possibility of being a bit hurt, it requires some courage as well. But I think tell me a story about that can be very, very helpful.
I don't have much new to add, but I really appreciate what both Paul and Allison said, and just to maybe reiterate in some way, especially what Allison was saying. So I think it's easy to dismiss somebody's viewpoint on something if we disagree, but you really can't dismiss somebody's experience. And so telling the story about why you may have this viewpoint about a particular position, whether it's gun rights or abortion, immigration, whatever the case may be. Usually we have that viewpoint because we have some experience, whether it's like very direct or less direct, but there's something that happened in the experience of our lives that made us have that particular stance on it. And so your stance and my stance may be very different based on the experiences we've had in our lives about that particular issue, what's happened in my life or your life, like everybody's been saying. And so I think, getting to the root of experience, and just, you can still disagree and probably will, but at least hearing the experience of the other I think can de-escalate things and make it just see each other's dignity that much more.
So the story thing is very true. The meeting I just came from, there was a woman who, with a translator, was explaining that without a driver's license, she can't volunteer at her child's school because they need to do a background check. A driver's license will allow that to happen. And that's much more powerful than just saying, all of which is true. We used to have driver's licenses just by saying you were a resident prior to 2008. So many states do this now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The talking points are all true, but the story really will resonate. So there are people, though, that in our families and in our parishes and in our daily lives, that it seems on the surface that they're simply reiterating talking points that they've heard on CNN or Fox News or from X, formerly Twitter. So I maybe preemptively telling a story that, Father Mike, that's an interesting topic you just brought up. I had this experience. Lead off with a story so that he understands where I'm coming from, instead of going with talking points first and then maybe getting to a story, maybe leading with a story to explain your position. And everybody, we're all parts of families. Everybody's got a burden that they carry. Everybody's got experiences. That's very, very true. And we forget that sometimes. And that is where we find common ground. Once we start talking about experiences in our neighborhoods and our families, that people will find something to at least understand where you're coming from. And that's a pathway to peace.
Thanks, Paul. Widening out the circle, we can talk about the role of advocacy, our call as Christians to stay engaged in politics after the election, past the family dinner table. Paul, you had mentioned some of the priorities that you're working on. That's certainly things that folks here in the room with us and online can advocate for, writing letters, contacting our local representatives. But I also know that, again, some of the work happens at the most local level. And we had talked about politics as a noble mission for promoting the common good. Another definition that I heard, and it was actually Allison, you had shared it last year about this time, we were at a meeting together, and you had shared about politics is the sacred conversation we're invited to talk about who we want to be together. That's good stuff.
I like
Yeah.
that.
You like that? A sacred conversation to talk about who we want to be together. As a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a nation. Knowing that, that there are a variety of solutions, right, out there to address an issue. And so that's one reason for trying to help the tip to embrace the ambiguity, right? Because there's no one single solution probably that's going to help solve immigration reform in this country. It's complicated, right? There's no silver bullet, if you will, to solve what the U.S. role in Gaza and Israel will be in the future, right? There's no simple solution for the affordable housing crisis that's happening here in the city of Grand Rapids and in the county, right? So want to just first ask, we know that there's no simple solution, and it calls for listening to one another, right? To our neighbors and our friends. And when we work together to try to come up with a solution, whether that's joining together to be part of a group that goes to the city commission or to the state capitol to advocate at a public meeting, to advocate on a particular issue, or it's writing our legislators, right, and helping organize a letter writing campaign, whatever it may be. But we know sometimes we need to work, if you will, across the aisle, right, with people who do disagree with us politically. But I love you told the story that you had in sharing about guns in one case, and then the story you shared. Thank you for sharing that in your conversation at McDonald's. And I know that's a lot of work of the Together West Michigan, is first building those relational networks across neighbor to neighbor and across neighborhoods, and then deciding on what are some of the things that we feel are important and issues that we need to address. And we can start here let's start here with the local level on what are some of the effective strategies then for the working together, right, and coming up with solutions, especially when people may disagree on what the best solution may be. And then do you have examples of some of the, successful collaborations, either between individuals or groups? I know Together West Michigan is an organization of partner organizations, including the Cathedral and a lot of the downtown area churches as well. So it's a great example of the success of ecumenical work too, of people working, if you will, with who disagree with each other, maybe on some doctrinal issues, but can still come together around, hey, here are some issues that we need to address about the kind of community we want to be in Grand Rapids and in the county and in West Michigan. So some tips on, how do you come up with solutions together even when you may disagree? And do you have some examples of success so far?
Yes. Yes and yes. So, right, we do. We start with listening. We actually hold listening campaigns. And some people in this room were part of, I think, the first Together West Michigan listening campaign in 2022, where we do a lot of house meetings, which is just a small group conversation where we ask, what are the pressures you and your family are facing? What are your experiences? What do you want to see different? And do you want to do something? And those both help us figure out what are the pressures that are being felt deeply and broadly, and who are the people who have some energy to do something about them that we could bring together, who would want to come together to do something, right? So we listen, and then we have people form teams around those issues and do research and become experts on the issues that they care about, which looks oftentimes like a lot of what we call research actions, where folks meet with city commissioners, elected officials at all levels, experts, organizational leaders, and ask, share, here's our experience with this issue. Here's our experience with affordable quality childcare and how hard it is to get it. Here's our issue with transportation as immigrants and refugees or what have you. And ask them, what's your understanding of why this is going on? And slowly regular people work together to piece together, okay, here's what's happening and here's sort of why it's happening. Now, what's a doable piece of this we could bite off and go after at the very local level? And so that's a lot of that has happened. We're really proud. So Together West Michigan leaders put together a whole campaign around having the driver's license test translated to Swahili so that Congolese immigrants could pass the test and get their driver's license, because a lot of them knew how to drive but couldn't pass the test because of language. So they were having huge transportation issues. And that conversation started in a church, I think this church basement of the Cathedral of Saint Andrew. And then went all the way up, and the Deputy Secretary of State came and stood before a group of, I think, 300 people at Trinity Reformed Church and made a commitment. And that proposal was put together by people living that issue in partnership with people who had never lived that issue, but who cared because they were in relationship with those folks. A couple of them are sitting in this room and were in those meetings. We did a lot of work around affordable quality childcare. And last year there's a millage in Kent County called the Ready by 5 millage that supports early childhood education. And there was a question of whether the renewal for that would even be on the ballot, because it was going to be in competition with a hotel tax. And to have two taxes on the same ballot was considered very politically risky. So our folks said this is an issue. They did lots of research. They saw that. They worked to try to get an expansion. And it was missed by one vote, but the renewal got on and passed by a landslide when folks were like, we don't even know if we can get this on the ballot. Right. And that was one of my favorite actions, because our folks filled the entire county commission chamber and 2 overflow rooms. And there was a 3-second delay on applause from the next room over. So if someone would make a good point and then 3 seconds later, everyone would cheer in the next room. But I mean, I could go on and on and on, mental health care money, affordable housing money, all kinds of things that are very local. And right now we're doing some very exciting speed bump work in one of the precincts of the 3rd Ward of Grand Rapids, because we had, I think, 13 neighborhood walks in one precinct that with very low voter turnout this election cycle. And all we did was go door to door and say, hey, what's going on? What are the pressures you and your family face? Do you want to do something about that? Which led to us bringing traffic safety on some key streets into a 300-person candidate accountability session with city officials and candidates, and having them publicly commit to do something about those issues, and to do something about youth programming and funding for that in that area as well. And brought together these whole new groups of people that never would have been together before, including the churches that were smack in the middle of that precinct saying for years, we really want relationships with our neighbors. We just don't know how to do it. And so we were like, well, why don't we go talk to them? And so we did, which seems so funny, but so hard at the same time. And I think I will stop talking in a moment. The biggest thing that I saw that could have held this up was this fear that people had going on these neighborhood walks in particular, that if I'm going to go to a place where people mostly don't look like me, and I am afraid that they will not want me there. They'll slam the door in my face. They'll get mad that I'm there. They'll get upset. They'll call me you, whatever, and they won't talk with me. Just this fear of being rejected. And I could tell you stories for days of experiences people had. But my favorite one was on election day when people were going back out in pairs to make sure people had voted. And Deb Van Dynen came back in from Oakdale Park Church. She's a 66-year-old retired teacher. And she goes, I just got hugged by these 2 really unlikely guys that looked a little thuggy. And I was like, what? What happened, Deb? And why did they hug you? And she said, they were just so glad that someone was out telling them what was going on and making sure they got out to vote and letting them know about this big city development so that they could be part of the conversation. That they hugged me. And so I think there's a lot there that, assuming you're going to be rejected off the bat just continues to create more and more of the same kind of polarization that we see and division that we see. But when you're willing to lean in and go for it, you can do all of those things and build some of that local work. That's more than you asked for. I just passed her. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you for your enthusiasm and excitement, Allison. Father Mike, I know you've been involved with the Together West Michigan organization here from the very beginning. Do you want to share any insights? And then we'll go to Paul and talk about at the state and national levels.
Sure, yeah. And so I've known Allison for a while, and she's a lot more, she's a lot closer to the political advocacy than I am. I get involved in different ways, and when I can. But just one good example, I think, of relational power is what Allison said, and power being something. The power is the ability to act, ability to do something. And just recently, we've been talking about not only the cathedral but other parishes nearby, the lack of mental health care, Spanish-speaking mental health care, and for youth as well. And there are not a lot of therapists out there that are able to do that. And so I was talking to Allison about it. She's been connecting me to other people. The other day, one of our parishioners, who's not really closely connected to the Hispanic community, but is a therapist himself, Rogelio. He's like, "Oh, Ken, I heard you're having this problem. You're trying to find affordable Spanish-speaking counselors for people who don't have any sort of insurance." And he's like, let me try to make up a list. I have connections. I know people. It's not going to be easy because there are not a lot of people out there, but let me at least try to start making a list so that when people come to you, which a lot have been, that either needing it themselves or needing it for their child, that you have somewhere to turn to. And so I think just having these relationships with Allison, with Rogelio, and with others that are dealing with the same problem, we've come to understand the magnitude of it. Not just my little world, but I can see it's bigger than just that, and so we can act upon it. I mean, we're not, at least I'm not working on any sort of political change on this. This is just local people trying to put our heads together to see if we can resolve a problem. But I think it speaks to the relationships and how that's so important in developing those. And if we put in the work first, as Heather West Michigan does, building the relationships first, then you can, on top of that, you can work towards something bigger. But I think it doesn't work the other way. You need the relationships first, and then you can work on something that you have common ground on. So
Thanks, Father Mike. Paul?
All great lessons from Allison and Father. So Mark, I'll ask it subsequently if you will again share with folks the sign up link for the Catholic Advocacy Network that the Michigan Catholic Conference has. And then there's a similar network that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has on federal issues. And we do work on some federal things from time to time when we're asked by the USCCB for some help reaching out to somebody locally. But our primary focus is in Lansing. So being part of those networks to get email alerts and just a daily, in our case, a weekly update on what's going on at the state capitol, Lansing, that's of interest to the church and what we're doing, so that you can engage then either through emails or in personal visits. But go back to the relationships. It really helps to have a personal knowledge of a legislator and their priorities. And so I think the good lessons from we've talked about today, now that the election's over with, we're going to have 12 new state representatives in Michigan. But regardless of whether your person is new or someone who was reelected, they all have coffee hours from time to time at the local Starbucks or at the library or at McDonald's or wherever. So I would encourage, going and saying hello. And again, what we discussed earlier this morning about listening, just go tell somebody that, hey, I live in the neighborhood and I saw that you got reelected and congratulations. And please know that I'll be praying for you. And, what are your goals and ambitions? Because as we've said before, when you look at the campaign ads or literature, it's not always clear what they stand for other than generic, West Michigan values or good families and good schools. So what are you really hoping to do the next 2 years? I'm interested in that, and let them tell their stories. And again, the lesson I'm always trying to remind myself: listen more than you speak. Find out where they're coming from. Again, hear those stories of why they support what they support. And again, build that relationship so that on the subsequent meetings or when you contact their office, they'll know who you are. And if we just go in with talking points and complaints and The relationship has to come first before you can have those harder discussions. You don't want to be that person that, okay, I'm at Starbucks for 15 more minutes and, oh, it's that Paul guy again from Kentwood. You know, we don't want that to be the reaction from our lawmakers. And I've noticed over the years that a lot of folks are very nervous about having those conversations because they're intimidated by the title of state representative or senator or mayor. You've got a new mayor in Grand Rapids, former legislator. They actually like talking to people because they're in the talking business, number one. And then secondly, they're just people. They used to be a florist, or they used to be on city council, or manage a grocery store before they became in elected office. Well, they're members of families too. They're members of parishes and congregations too. They're neighbors. So treating them as such, don't be intimidated by that. Because again, I remember my parish years ago went with me to an advocacy day at the state capitol, and Paul, you do the talking because I just don't know that a senator. I don't know. And she came out. That was so nice and so easy, and it was like talking with somebody over the coffee table. That's all it really is. So don't be intimidated, and be intentional about trying to reach out to folks and meet them and start a relationship so that when there does come an issue, then you've got that relationship to build upon. And again, being a local government guy from early in my career, local government I love because for most of us, what we see in the news is one thing, but what really impacts our lives is the lack of a stop sign at that one corner we all know is dangerous. What's going on in the playground at our schools, and how come that playground hasn't been fixed yet in years, it needs it. That stuff really matters because that builds community, and then we build from there.
Thanks, Paul. And it's a good reminder about titles, especially since there's those of us in the room that have been conditioned by titles like Reverend, Excellency, Your Eminence, and how to talk to people like that, right? And we're going to open up the floor right now for questions and comments from people in the room and online. Just again, a reminder for the folks online, if you could use the raise hand function, and then we'll know that you want to speak, or you can just turn on your camera too. That'll be a good hint to me that you want to share. But folks here in the room, I'll be the roving microphone. You can, if you have a particular question for one of our panelists, you can ask them, or a general question, or if you have some tips that may not have been shared here by our panelists. They have their expertise in their own field, right? But you also have an expertise. You've been hanging out with your family, so you might have some tips for us as well. So if you have those, please feel free to share. I can just raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
There's not. I always find the family prayer at Thanksgiving, at least when I'm in charge of offering the prayer, just, and we pray for our nation, we pray for our states, that we're all open to God's wisdom, and leave it at that. And that's at least starting that. It's a positive thing, and it should be sincere, because all prayer should be sincere, of course. But in some cases, yeah, the rule of we just don't discuss politics because we've got certain family members who get carried away, and it's best not to have that. That sometimes that's what has to be done. And then you build on that because, okay, we got through Thanksgiving, nobody said anything, and we all reminded each other we're family. And hopefully that just kind of simmers things down that, oh yeah, Uncle Charlie's not a bad guy after all. I'm sure I know how he voted, but you remember why you love each other and don't let politics get in the way.
I think you said it well. It's hard. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, just to reiterate, I think again, what common ground can we find? And if the common ground is we're praying for the newly elected officials, and that's it, then great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Mayor. Let me just jump in. Do you have a separate question, or do you want to comment on this? Okay, I have a comment too. I think there's the time and the place that, as I think about it, there's the time and the place for talking politics, and maybe Thanksgiving is not it. right? So how do we create spaces with our family members who do want to talk about politics, and maybe at Thanksgiving it's a separate room, right? There's the rumpus room for the politic talk, but it's not at the family dinner table where we're going to give what we're all grateful for, right? In our prayer, here's what we're grateful for. And for those who want to talk about how to solve the world's problems, the rumpus room is that's what's set for. Or maybe it is a separate time, right? Because if that's the only time we're getting together, that's a limitation to being able to have the conversation, to be able to then find common ground. Yeah, Mary, you have Paul, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that's the better answer of everything, that the dinner table is not the place, because you wouldn't finish the prayer and, so what do you think about the election? No. Let's talk about family and what a wonderful Thanksgiving this is. And boy, we sure miss Aunt Margaret. Talk about the grandparents. That's the time for family stories and focus on family and God and what we're thankful for. Any discussion with family, I guess I would have prefaced that earlier. Yeah, toast this is the drinking part. When my brothers-in-law say, hey, happy Thanksgiving, and we do our first cheers with the Bloody Mary Thanksgiving morning, how about Trump? Wasn't that great? Or, oh, I can't believe Harris didn't win. Maybe that's the time to have those conversations in a charitable, kind way, not the dinner table. Dinner table should be, that's the focus, that we're all sitting down, hopefully for more than 10 minutes before getting back to football. That's the time to focus on family and faith and true Thanksgiving, speaking of Thanksgiving. But I'd agree. So I'd agree with that completely. Politics talk is for, hey, so what'd you think about the election? Or what are your thoughts? That's for outside on the deck. That's for in the other room. That's for the billiard table or ping pong or something. Dinner table, let's keep that for food and family and memories.
Billiards. I don't know that I want to talk to someone who has a stick in their hand.
I was just going to make that a very similar comment and say, there's already a lot of pressure when you're thinking about Thanksgiving, right? Some people travel really far to see their family. Some people, it's a lot, and people are cooking all day and bringing things, and it's just a lot. Or even Christmas, but like those are really high stress times. And so when are we having the conversations before that? Right? Or you see something, that someone is passionate about, in the weeks before or after, just pick up the phone and say, wow, you know what? I saw this thing, or I know this is really important to you, or yeah, this is, I know this is a concern of yours. So you're making the common ground about lots of other things. You're kind of building the relationship out a little bit, even with like nieces and nephews. Like to me, I have lots of nieces and nephews who think very different than I do. And I think, okay, so not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, but just on a random Tuesday, right? When I see something or I hear something or there's an article or a podcast, sometimes those are great things to just share well before or after at a less stressful time.
But let's finish with a word of hope from our panelists, signs of hope, and then we'll finish up with some announcements and prayer. Does anyone want to start? One sign of hope. One sign of hope.
One sign of hope. Father Mike will have a great closing comment. Hopefully, I'm going to give him time. This was a great discussion, very thought-provoking, and the last two women who spoke really tug at my heart in terms of, yes, we have to recognize evil, and all joking aside, I think the things we talked about today, to how do we calm division in our parish community, our parish family, our own personal families. If we can calm down and come to a better understanding of remembering who we are as brothers and sisters of a family, brothers and sisters in Christ, that pushes the evil one out and gives God the chance to get back in if we can end divisions and build from there. So indirectly we discussed evil, but evil is there, and calling it by name, that is important not to forget. So I feel for all of your families and mine as well. I will reach out to my sisters today on the way home. I've been putting that off for a week since the election. And it's time to have those discussions, and have those discussions before Thanksgiving. Reach out. Hey, so the election's over with, and at least the commercials are done. Let's get back to having peace. And who's bringing pie? Let's get back to, again, joking aside, get back to focusing on our families. The hope is that God wins in the end. And again, I'm serious about that we have to trust in the Lord, that whatever happened last week, we're going to have election again in 2 years. I wasn't happy with how things turned out 4 years ago, 16 years ago. I've supported people that have lost and won. But yes, in earlier years, we seem to be able to come back together and all right, let's get back to doing the hard work of freedom, regardless of who won. And we need to be the ones that are champions of that positive attitude, which is not just to feel good, it's to truly build community and our faith community again. So I find hope in just this discussion itself was wonderful today.
I think I appreciate the comment about naming evil for what it is, and that, you know, Catholics are baptized into the mission of Christ, prophet, priest, and king, and there is a prophetic dimension to the faith. And I want to stand the word love up next to evil and just lift up the fact that love is not easy, nor squishy, nor weak, nor soft. Love is difficult and powerful and hard. So when we say love and acting in love, because hate can't drive out hate, we're not saying being squishy. We're saying something very challenging and extremely important. And in terms of a sign of hope, I will say we walked to over 1,000 doors in a precinct in Southeast Grand Rapids over 2 months before the election, and almost exclusively talked with people about what's going on and what keeps you up at night and their concerns about traffic safety and youth programming and affordable housing. And heard a lot of sort of skepticism about being engaged with other people to try to change anything ever. And then when we held a candidate accountability session where half of it focused on the issues in that neighborhood, probably 40 or 50 people from the neighborhood showed up, and several of them stayed after to say, "We've never been a part of anything like this. Thank you. We did not know this was possible, and we want to keep being a part of it." And I don't know how those people voted, but I do know that the election stats showed that in Kent County and Grand Rapids, voter turnout dropped compared to 2020 by 4 or 5%. In that precinct, it dropped by 1%. And so we know that relational work works.
Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, just my sign of hope really is the people in this room. I feel honored to be entrusted with the stories that you've all told and the emotions that you've shared with us. You've all taken for some of you, risk to come here today to talk about what happened, to talk about your feelings about what happened, and find ways to move forward, or at least to take steps that may not seem like it's moving forward, because sometimes we need to sit in the present for a while. But I think what you're all doing today is something that very few people are willing to do, really, which is to, after the election, to come and talk about it, actually share your experience of it. Most people just keep on kind of gliding along and just try to make the most of their lives. But you've all made the decision to come and open it up more, and how it can improve your life, but also how your faith informs it, and how that relates to other people and how that affects other people. So I really appreciate everybody's sharing, and I find hope that all of you are willing to come here and do this, and we all take the next steps forward.
Father Mike, thanks. And Allison, thank you. Paul, thank you. Can we show a round of some appreciation? Let's close our time in prayer. You can find, again, on the table, and for folks online, you can find the prayer in your inbox. The history of this prayer is originally it was written by Father Ken Untner, who just within a couple of months became the Bishop of Saginaw, but had written it for Cardinal John Dearden of Detroit, and then was really got some visibility because Romero, our Archbishop Oscar Romero, used it when he was installed as the Archbishop of San Salvador at a very important time, not only in Salvador, but in our church's history and his martyrdom. And then again, Pope Francis used it in 2015. And we can join them together in this prayer. So let's say this together. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that can be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. May we never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. And Father Mike, are you willing to give us a blessing?
Sure. The Lord be with all of you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless us all here in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. May we go and eat.
Thanks be to God.